Yeah, I'm sort of crashing this party. I invited myself, and Danielle was extremely generous to say yes, because this is an area in which I've been working for my entire career. And not only was she generous in saying yes, but she was generous in providing a wonderful panel of respondents. I should apologize for a moment and say that I'm struggling with bronchitis from a trip from Australia that I just made. So I'm sorry about that. Now, instead of really talking to my PowerPoint, first of all, you have a paper that you can read that's, I think, a more tedious, scholarly, tendentious, and snarky paper that you can read. What I want to do is concentrate on the PowerPoint, but before I do, talk a little bit about the things I've learned. I'm sort of taking my cue from Bowen yesterday, and talk about some of the things I learned and heard yesterday that have made an impact on me. When Bowen was talking, he was talking about things that conflicted for him. For me, it's more things that made me feel kind of good, and about how there's all kinds of bridging possible here. One of the first things I thought about related to yesterday and seeing the panel was somebody who made reference to the aging of the professoriate. And when I think about the people on the panel with me, I think this is a very distinguished and perhaps with the exception of Aaron, aging a panel. But the wonderful thing about all of them and all of us is we've devoted our careers to the issue of practice-research integration. And whenever anybody asks me what I do, that's what I tell them. And as a matter of fact, one time on a trip to Australia, I was sitting next to a guy who was a nuclear engineer, and he was talking a lot about what he did. And finally, you're on a plane for 16 hours together. And finally, he asked me what I did, and I told him about practice, research, integration, and social work. And he says, "That's rather looking through the narrow end of the funnel, wouldn't you say, mate?" And that was the end of that conversation. But it is a topic that I've been committed to, obsessed with through my entire career. I must acknowledge that my distinguished panel, with the exception of Aaron, represent all people that I've taken pokes at over the years. And so, in some respects, we could rename this panel Geriatric Smackdown, something to that effect. But some of the comments that have been made yesterday make me feel sort of less worried, because I felt that one of the things that during Alan's talk, he was in some respects making a very good case for clinical data mining. He was talking about it with specific respect to ESTs, and I do clinical data mining much more broadly, but it certainly was consistent with what I do with practitioners, what I do with doctoral students. Likewise, it was very heartening for me to hear from both Eileen and Aaron, as well as Bruce, about the fact that all of us are in it for the same thing. We're in it to promote the well-being of our clients, to provide better service, to provide more efficient service. So we may be going at it in different ways, but what unites us all is really a commitment to client service. So I'll tell you a little bit about my career, and I sort of divided into 4 decades. I'm a sociologist, and I began, as well as a social worker, and I began my work on sort of the sociology of social work as a profession. And I did sort of 10 years, my dissertation, 10 years of studies. Nobody ever read anything that I wrote because the findings were just too complex. They did not fit any of the ideological perspectives or narratives that different segments of social work brought to the profession. Then, largely as a result of attending the conference that Alan Rubin and Aaron Rosenblatt did, I shifted into program evaluation. And I spent another 10 years writing books with Tony Tripodi and doing evaluation consultation, evaluations in many different kinds excuse me, of social work agencies, but had the experience that many of us have had about being thanked, and then the evaluation goes in a drawer and nothing happens with it. You go back 5 years later, people are doing the same stuff that was going on when you did the evaluation. A third part of my career was devoted to developing computerized clinical information systems with the hope that they would not only support research activities on the part of, for the profession at large, but also promote practitioner decision-making. It didn't work for various reasons, too long to go into. Some of it had to do with the state of technology at the time, but a lot of it had to do with some basic problems that have been talked about here today. So in the last 10 years, primarily by accident, but I have an adjunct appointment at Mount Sinai Medical Center, where what I do is engage practitioners in doing research, and research of all different kinds. Some might be RCTs, some might be clinical data mining, some might be surveys, needs assessment surveys, some might be surveys of outcomes, whatever. And the basic premise is the way to engage practitioners in research is to actually have them do it, and have them do it about the stuff they're interested in, about their own practice. Have them do it in such a way that it is integrated into everything they do. Another thing that I heard yesterday, I love metaphors. I pay a lot of attention, especially when I work with doctoral students on qualitative dissertations. Sorry. I say pay a lot of attention to the metaphors people use. Yesterday, both Alan and Bruce made reference to low-hanging fruit. And they talked about it in different contexts. Bruce talked about it in relation to clinical data mining using available data. Alan, I think, talked about it in the context of agencies and going to agencies that were open to this kind of practice research integration. And in some respects, it does characterize the work that I do. But I wouldn't use that term invidiously. First of all, I'd say to Bruce, well, available data, it's not as though the pear that's closest to you on the tree is any less good than the one that's highest to reach. I don't know if anybody raises hairs here, but the point is that using available data, using data that practitioners have generated as a way of engaging them in research seems to me to make eminent sense. Likewise, for somebody who doesn't have that many years left, the idea of finding agencies that have infrastructures and administrators that support this kind of engagement of practitioners is the way to go. Not try to convince places that are sort of said, well, maybe we should do research, maybe there's money in it, but places like Mount Sinai, where it is part of the culture and the structure of the place to expect that practitioners will engage in some kind of research activity. The purpose of my presentation is really to, I said before, I love metaphors, is really the question, the bridge metaphor, that's so familiar. I think Bruce mentioned yesterday in the conference at Columbia in 1994 or so on, where the bridge metaphor is used, and it's used everywhere. It's used everywhere where, in the context of applied science, every profession talks about the problem, the linkage between science and practice, and they use the bridge metaphor. But I would suggest that the way that metaphor is used and the way it has been used in this conference, with all due respect, is one way, research to practice. And to me, a bridge has traffic that goes both ways. Instead, I would say it's more like a pipeline. Okay? For what it's worth, and all the talk about the faithfulness of the interventions, the integrity of all of that reflects the expectation that somehow what goes on in the agency is going to approximate what is required for research purposes. Now, what I want to do is, I'll tell you how I came about this. I just started Googling bridges, and out came a number of different announcements about conferences in different fields that made reference to bridging, and also made reference to this distinction between bridging and pipelines, which was quite a surprise to me because I thought I was so clever in coming up with it. So I want to talk about some of the similar ways in which our sister professions look at this issue, mainly to make the point that they're all struggling with the same thing, and the solutions that they're offering are solutions that involve moving from the other side, moving from the practitioner side to practice. What can practice contribute to research as much as what research can contribute to practice? And I have to say that in the last 10 years of my career, some people have accused me of going native, the way they talk about anthropologists who have sort of given up being anthropologists and found somebody that they love in the tribe that they're studying and say, forget about going back, forget about my thesis, I'm going to stay here, it's much happier. And so in many respects, it's true, well, I did marry a social worker, but it is true that that I identify very much. I'm trained as a researcher. I have a Ph.D. in sociology, trained as a quantitative researcher, but I very much identify with the perspective that practitioners bring to research, largely by spending a lot of time with them and attempting to engage them in the research enterprise. I also want to suggest in this talk that ironically and sadly, I think that in many respects, the Society for Social Work and Research, their journal, Research on Social Work Practice, and EBP rhetoric represent significant obstacles to practitioner engagement, though practitioners get the blame for those obstacles. And so that's the part that will get my colleagues roused, I think. And I'm looking forward to an active discussion with them about that. And finally, to offer some metaphorical, methodological, conceptual, and strategic alternatives to existing pipeline arrangements that will turn that pipeline into a bridge. Metaphors matter. Some enlighten us, some mislead, some maintain the status quo, some promote change. As I said before, the bridge metaphor implies two-way traffic between research and practice. The pipeline, one-way flow from research to practice. Now, I alluded to the fact that I've discovered, through the miracle of Google, that there are a lot of people who are thinking like me in other fields.